Association of Yiddish Writers and Journalists in Israel. She, in spreading the word and wanting to increase interest in Yiddish and opportunities for Yiddish, she found.
Es sind du Menschen, was haben übergelebt, das Gehennen bei den Nazis, in Willen nicht helden mehr von dem, nur vergessen, im Abhacken von sich die schweren Gedanken in sich räumes. Es sind noch du, die, was nicht nur willen sein nicht, nur sie können nicht vergessen, in seitdem tagtäglich überleben. In das Schreiben wegen dem reißt sich heraus von seiner Neshama. We are familiar with the Holocaust survivor who wants to forget, wants to blot out the memories of his suffering. On the other hand, there is the survivor who will not and cannot forget, and he relives his terrible experiences every single day, and writing about this period and telling about this period literally is ripped out of his very soul and his being. Such a person was my father, Rachmil Bryks. I remember as a child, the Holocaust was a part of our home. My father, even at a very young age, our very young age, spoke about it. And when my mother would sometimes say, 999, red nicht, don't talk over this, he used to say, Nein, sie müssen wissen. No, they must know. So perhaps it sounds strange, but I felt like Holocaust was like perhaps another sister in the house because she was constantly there with us in the family. My father survived the war because he felt that it was his holy mission to do so, after the war, to continue to write, to tell about what the Nazis did to the Jewish people during the Nazi era. My father, Rachmil Bryks, was an author, a poet, a dramatist. He wrote numerous articles in journals and newspapers around the world. His writings are unique in Holocaust literature, since he dared to write of that period with black humor. He started to write in the 1950s when everything was still fresh and the world was not yet ready to hear about this period. He wrote about humor because he actually witnessed humor and ridicule in the ghetto and in the concentration camp. In his books, he concentrates on his task to reveal essentially the human element in man, to bring out the sparks of holiness in the human spirit, the Sabbath sanctity of the Jewish man and woman and child, their readiness to sacrifice themselves for others, to redeem someone else's life at the cost of their own. In his books, we also see the sense of trust, of not losing hope, of not losing one's faith in his fellow man, and that in spite of everything, there is optimism and the world will be redeemed. At the same time, though, my father wrote truth. That means he didn't gloss over the Jewish traitors or the Jewish police, the informers, the capos. He didn't deny the inhuman acts that were sometimes committed by renegade Jews against their own brethren. He essentially wanted to show what Nazism or any form of dictatorship is capable of doing to a man. Some biographical notes. My father was born April 12, 1912, and in the town, the shtetl Skarżysko-Kamienna, which is in Poland, between Radom and Kielce. And he was the second son out of 8 children. He had a traditional Jewish education. At the age of 14, he went with his family to Lodge, and there he enriched his intellect, and he realized his artistic talent, and he developed it, and he performed in the Yiddish theaters Zricha and Hazamir. And he did not continue going to school, and he was basically an autodidact. He read a great deal, and that enriched his life and influenced his writing. At the same time, when he was in Lodge, he also began writing. He wrote poetry. And in 1938, he debuted with his first Yiddish poem in a literary journal called Insel. In 1939, in 1939, he issued his first book, Young Green May, in Lodge, and it was very well received, but unfortunately it was the eve of the war, and he found himself soon in the Lodge Ghetto. I just want to read a small poem from this book, Alleyen. I'll read it first in Yiddish and translate it into English. Alleyen, alleys. Gassen, von beide Seiten baziert mit Beimer, wie Seides mit Baird. Blätter grüne, seine Gesichter, wo stullen sich kuschendig wie verliebte Purlach. Und über seine Cap hängt der Himmel wie a Chippa. Alleys, streets adorned on both sides by trees, like bearded grandfathers, green leaves touching, cuddling each other as if kissing, like couples in love. And over their heads hangs the sky like a canopy. He found himself in May 1940, in the Lodge Ghetto, and he was among the 164,000 Jews who were chased into the Lodge Ghetto. He was there for 4 years. He left with the last transport, but they started from January to May 1942, they started the deportations from Lodge, and from the ghetto rather, and 55,000 Jews were sent out via Radegast to Auschwitz and other camps. The Germans thought that it would be best to appoint a Jewish elder of the ghetto, Chaim Rumkowski. Mordechai Chaim Rumkowski is his full name, and they felt that this would be a better way to control the Jews, that it would be a Jewish person who was in charge. And this Rumkowski felt that he was like the Caesar, the emperor. My father wrote his first depiction of the Lodge Ghetto, Der Kaiser Ghetto, the Caesar or the emperor of the ghetto, because Rumkowski, as strange as it may sound, there were people starving, there were people searching for work, demonstrating. It was miserable conditions, but Rumkowski had his own manicurist, photographer, person who wrote a diary, and he had 17,000 people who were protectionäre, selected staff members whom he protected and always had what to eat. Der Kaiser Ghetto would be considered historical fiction or testimonial literature. The events took place, but my father embellished it with different personalities. Rumkowski is still considered today a controversial figure. To his defenders, he's a tragic figure, while his detractors view him as a traitor and a collaborator. They're not sure today, was it good or was it not good for the Jews? Did it help them survive or not? The Lodge Ghetto was the largest ghetto, and it was made up of different factories, because Rumkowski's idea was that if you keep them working, then they'll stay alive longer, and they sold the produce to the Germans, and there was some profit there, and that's what kept the ghetto going for 4 years. Oh, sorry. The sequel to Der Kaiser Ghetto, the Papierene Kroim, the Paper Crown, which continues discussing the ghetto, the Lodge Ghetto, and can you hear okay? Is it okay? Sorry?
Speak up.
Oh, louder, of course. Fine. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Nachman Blumenthal from Yad Vashem wrote as a forward to this book, Oib mir haben schon mehr weniger genaue Monographies wegen der allgemeinen Geschichte von den Jiden im Ghetto in jener Zeit, hat uns gefällt eine genaue Abspiegelung von seiner tagtäglichen und innerlichen jüdischen Leben. Wegen was haben die Jiden zwischen sich gerät, wegen was haben sie getracht, wie haben sie gefühlt, seine Psychologie, seine Folklore, was ist gewesen, seine Animamen, wie haben sie ausgesehen, was für Malbischen haben sie getragen, was für ein Schiech, was für ein Machulim haben sie gegessen, mit was haben sie verbracht im Tag, seine Luschen. Das als malt Rachmil Bryks auf seinen eigenartigen und lebendigen Eufen ergittens am Museum. Dr. Blumenthal from Yad Vashem wrote that we have a lot of literature about the ghetto, but what was missing was an actual daily life, a depiction. What were they thinking? What did they wear? What did they eat? What did they do all day? What did they believe in? Even what kind of shoes they had. And he says that you can learn from Rachmil Bryks' book. It's like entering a living museum. The end of Rumkowski is that he himself was sent to Auschwitz and he was gassed. And again, there are controversial points here. Some people say that the Germans themselves sent him, but my father sympathized with him. And Professor Sol Lipson writes as follows: Rumkowski, who sent tens of thousands of his co-religionists to their deaths, was depicted by the passionate novelist to have been finally overwhelmed by nightmares and crushed by the weight of his conscience, so that he added his own name to the list of Jews sent to the crematoria. Sorry, no, wait. Okay, go back 1 second. Okay, next. In the Papier Necroim is one of his stories, Constant Ghetto, in English, A Cupboard in the Ghetto. This has become very popular. It tells the story of a couple who were in the ghetto, and how basically you were not allowed to cook. You were not allowed there was actually no food available, and they used to take leaves, beetroots, cabbage leaves, and prepare all kinds of delicacies. And my father tells in Constant Ghetto how they had a cupboard with shelves and doors and a back, and every time they would take out a shelf or a back or a side and cook from that. And they were very proud that they were able to do that. And if you perhaps dig a little deeper, you ask yourself, you keep taking the shelves, the side, the back, when does a cupboard stop being a cupboard? And you take away a human's dignity. When does a man actually stop being a man? And my father showed that there was still what's called Tselem Enosh. The human spirit still existed, and there was resistance, and people wanted to live and survive. What's the next one? A Kinderspielen Ghetto. This is one of the rarest, I think, descriptions in the Lodge Ghetto, because here my father actually went into folklore. He described how children behaved in the ghetto, and he describes the games that they played. One played Rumkowski, one was the Nazi, and they were beating each other. And this has become very popular in various anthologies, because not many people have approached this part of the ghetto lore. Out of his 7 books, this is the 5th one, Ghetto Fabric 76. The reason Ghetto Factory 76, this came out half Yiddish and the other side in English. It's called 76 because it was the 76th factory that existed in the ghetto. And today it just seems so strange to hear. It was chemical waste utilization. What they actually did, the Jews took potato peels and made alcohol out of it. And This was useful in the ghetto and for the Germans, and it kept them going. My father himself was a guard in the factory. He was the one in charge of staying at the door, making sure that, heaven forbid, no one should steal any potato peels and take it home to eat. And he risked his life. He felt he was doing his part in helping, because he sometimes just let people through and let them take, of course, take home to food to be able to continue existing. My father had told me that Ghetto Fabric 76, he wrote it in the ghetto, and before he was sent away to Auschwitz, he buried his works. And this Ghetto Fabric 76 was discovered after the war, and the original is in the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, Yiddish Historische Institute in Warsaw. And I remember my whole life my father was saying that his work is there and other manuscripts, but he himself refused to return to Poland. He refused to step on German soil. He didn't go back at all to Europe after the war. And I knew that one day I would have to go to Poland because I wanted to see the actual manuscripts. In the Ghetto Fabric, we can also understand the psychology and the mood of the Jews in the ghetto. In August 1944, with the last transport out of the Lodge Ghetto, when there were only 70,000 Jews left in the Lodge Ghetto, my father was sent to Auschwitz. And he writes about Auschwitz in Oif Kiddush Hashem, which has been translated into English variously as either Kiddush Hashem, or sanctification, or in sanctification of God's name. In this book, he tells us about one family. He tells us about Dvorah Leah and Rivkala and her father, Rav Aaron. My father felt that if you write about millions, it diminishes it. You can't really feel it. But if you write about one mother, one father, one child, it's much stronger. And these symbolize all the millions of mothers and, of course, children and fathers who were killed. And as I mentioned before, this is it's a strong book because you can see that in spite of all the suffering, people still had dignity and human spirit. The second page, actually the frontispiece, when you open the book, is a Lezecher Olam, where my father wrote down the names of all his relatives who were gone. Das Sefer Zikurin meine Nonster, he dedicated the book to them. Mein Vater, Tuvia Zal, is gewesen an Ish Tumim, a Chussid, a Herziger Baltfira Balkore, hat kemat nicht nehene gewesen von Oilem Hase. Mein Mutter Serel Hinda, mein Schwester Esther mit dem Mann Yechiel, zwei Kinder, Lach Moishe Ruchele, mein Schwester Tropche mit ihr Mann Yidel und die Kinder, mein Schwester Leah und Mann. These are names of all his relatives who got murdered. Sei alle seinen umgekommen auf Kiddush Hashem in Treblinka, Simchas Torah, 1942. They were all sent from Skajesk. You remember, he was in Lodz already. They stayed in Skajesk. So he went from Lodz to Auschwitz, but they were sent to Treblinka. And in May 1942, this was on Simchat Torah. The Germans usually like to pick Jewish holidays to have these mass deportations. Zusammen mit ein paar hundert Nefoshes. And his brother Simcha, who after the war, he survived the war, and he was actually a soldier, a Polish soldier who helped liberate Poland. He went back to Skajisk, and he was killed by Polish nationalists after the war, together with his bride, Sonia. They were supposed to be married a few days later. He was 25 years old, and she was 22. And my father ends, Hashem Yinkom Damam. May their blood be avenged. His most famous book is A Constant Ghetto. This is a drawing from the book. And this is a unique novella. In it, he focuses on the cat as the figure around whom the story is told. There was a rumor in the ghetto that there are mice in the storage houses, and if anyone would bring a cat, they'll get a 2-kilo loaf of bread. So people started looking for cats. And the entire story is told in humor, and of course they were misled. There was no such thing. And you could tell the psychology of what they went through in the ghetto, and this has become his most celebrated book. Yitzchak Bashevis Singer, the writer, Isaac Bashevis Singer, was a friend of ours, and he wrote about this. Excuse me. Rachmil Bryks, der begabte und gewissenhaftiger Erzähler, seiner Constant Ghetto benutzt a tragischen Humor, was man kann nicht finden, kein ähnlichen in der Weltliteratur. Verwusst, weil kein schon ander Volk und kein schon dort bei uns jeden hat nicht durchgemacht, was eine scheuerliche Katastrophe wie unser Dorf in den nazischen Ghettos und Konzentrationslagern, wo es Bryks ist gelungen, durch tausende Nissen überzuleben. Jedes Seite von Bryks' Werk ist jiddische Geschichte. Wollt gewähnt verblieben von Chub in Beis Hamikdash als eine neue Chronik, wie es geht uns Bryks, wollten jeden sei gewähnt geleint, jeden Tischubov und vergossen bei ihr Teichen träden. Leinen Bryks' Buch hat nicht nur ab Mitzvah, euch ein heilige Chäuf. And I have that in English. Rachmil Bryks is a talented and conscientious storyteller. His work at Cat in the Ghetto has a tragic humor, which is unique in world literature. Every page of Bryks' book is Jewish history. If there had remained as detailed a chronicle of the destruction of the temple as Bryks has succeeded in recording, Jews would read it every Tisha B'Av and shed rivers of tears. It is a sacred duty to buy and read Bryks' book. This is my favorite book, Die Wosenisch geblieben, Those Who Did Not Survive. And this is actually a pre-war book. He wrote it in the 60s, but it's actually, he told me it was the foundation for all his other books. This tells the story of Skazis Kamiena, his town, his shtetl, and it's full of anecdotes and tradition and superstitions about our families and aunts and uncles and grandparents. And part of why I like this book, besides that being very pleasant, it makes me feel closer to the family that I never ever got to know, was that here he not only perpetuates the memory of those who went away, but he also perpetuates the life, the pre-war life, which I'm afraid today many people don't appreciate. The Yiddish literature that was gone, all the creators that could no longer continue to write. After his death, my mother, Hinda Wolf, issued his last manuscript. This is Die Antläufers, Those Who Ran, and von Gesieße zum Leben, from agony or from dying to life. The first part, Die Antläufers, is how the war began, how the Germans came into Poland, and the second half, von Gesieße zum Leben, is how he himself was liberated and survived the war. He himself, after Auschwitz, because he was still young and healthy, was sent to several labor camps, and he was liberated from Berlin, the 2nd of May 1945. And through Lübeck in Germany, he was sent to Sweden. for healing in Stockholm, Sweden. That's where he was. And in Stockholm, he actually began to write all the previous books that I mentioned. His books were also translated into Hebrew, Al Kiddush Hashem, Chatul Beghetto, and it was first published in English, A Cat in the Ghetto in 1959, translated by S. Morris Engel. This was published by the Block Publishing Company, and the drawing is by Raphael Sawyer. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote a letter, which my father included. I realize we need reminders of human suffering. Your book, A Cat in the Ghetto, was hard for me to read, and yet it is well written, and one should read it in order not to forget. In 1977, about 18 years later, the book was reissued under the name Kiddush Hashem as a Jewish legacy book by Berman House. And 32 years later, just 2 years ago in 2009, I reissued it with Perceived Publishers in New York, and I have an afterword in the book. My father's works have been included in various anthologies. For example, When Night Fell, they included 2 stories there. And recently, the Koala Memory, which is an anthology of narratives, how to teach the Holocaust. So His Covered in the Ghetto is included here, and I was asked to write a description, biographical information, which I called, the story is Covered in the Ghetto, and I called my story The Man Behind the Cupboard. His stories were also dramatized, and here in the Theater of the Holocaust by Robert Skloot, actually someone who lives in California, perhaps you've heard of Shimon Winselberg, he dramatized it, and it was known as Resort 76, or alternatively, The Windows of Heaven. And the first time it was staged, you can see this is in Swedish, Katten i Ghettot. It was staged in 1970 in the Royal Dramatic Theatre in Sweden. It has variously been performed by many university theaters and others in the United States, among them the Whole Theatre, the infamous Commonwealth Theatre, and this is a brochure that we received. This is my father with Salman Shazar. My father actually met Shazar when his name was still Robishov in Stockholm, Sweden. Shazar himself was a Yiddish poet, and when Shazar became president of Israel, of the state of Israel, so my father presented him with his books, and here he is in his office. And just quite curious, when Shazar passed away in October 1974, my father passed away 3 days later. And we tended to think that maybe Shazar was lonely and needed someone to speak Yiddish with, and asked him to come and join him. In Stockholm, my father was very active among what we call Shadis Apleita, those who survived, and he went to different survivor groups, and he read to them, and he spoke with them, and encouraged them to go on. And at one of these evenings, he met a young Romanian woman, Hinda Ettelwolf. They fell in love. They got married in the Great Synagogue in Stockholm, and that's my mom. And that's my sister, Miriam Sarala. I'm the little baby, and this is the picture in Sweden. And while my father was in Sweden, he corresponded with the YIVO, with Max Weinreich. He also gave him materials about Swedish Jewry post-war, and helped them with the Sonnenband Archiv, which is an important archives of the Lodge Ghetto, which is now in YIVO in New York. This is a letter which I found in the YIVO archives, which I think is just fascinating. Excuse me a second. Can you hear me? Yeah? This is the letter. I don't think, can you just lower it a second. 1 second. This is from the American Joint Distribution Committee. This is March 10, 1949. It says here, Bryks Rachmil, wife Irena, child Miriam Serela, and child Baila Svea. My parents gave me a middle name Svea, S-V-E-A, like of Sweden, so I'll remember that I was born in Sweden. And this is for the United Service for New Americans. And it says, gentlemen, the above-named family will be leaving for the United States on board the Stockholm on March 15. As you know, the Bryks family received the visas owing to Mr. Bornstein's affidavit. This was a person we did not know, but he voluntarily sponsored the family. That's how we came to the United States. Mr. Bornstein was induced to execute this affidavit on request of the Yiddish scientific The couple has 2 small children and no relatives in the States, so that we should be very grateful if you would kindly take a special interest in the family and assist them in finding accommodation and making a start in the new country. I thought that was absolutely fascinating when I found this letter. My sister approached the Swedish-American line and actually found the passenger list of our voyage. And you can see here, Bryks, Rachmil, Irene, Miriam, Bella. I was 4 months old. And my mother told me that I actually traveled in a basket. When I was in Yad Vashem, I found this photo and I said, oh my goodness, that could have been me. This is how we traveled on the boat to America. And we came through YIVO and also HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. Yes. This is my sister and I when we were in New York. The family came to New York and we were located on the Upper West Side. And actually my parents lived to the very end on the Upper West Side their whole life. In our home, my parents chose to speak only Yiddish. That's why I know Yiddish today, because my father was very strict about it. We were not permitted to speak any other language in the house. I learned I think I learned English only in 1st grade, and I learned Hebrew also. We went to Jewish day schools. My father was very strict, very proud especially, that his daughters, after the war, were still able to speak Yiddish, and he took us around, and he was very, very, gewesen sehr stolz mit uns. Yes. This is me when I'm about 5 years old, and my father had a lot of patience. He sat with me, he taught me to write Yiddish, to read Yiddish, and we had a book which I loved, Mein Aleph Bes, by Kaminsky. And in it were little poems, funny little poems, according to the alphabet. And we would read it, and that's how I learned. And I'll just tell you some of my favorites. Aleph was Itzig Spitzig. Itzig Spitzig Piper Noter, dreht dem Eck beim schwarzen Koter. Macht sich viel Papier a Schwerdel, nimmt dem Stecken Fahrer Ferdel. Oh, is das an Itzikel? So you can imagine it's very attractive. And for example, Gimel would be Gensel. Gensel, do I need to translate the Itzig Spitzig? No. I think it's understandable.
Yes, I would love to hear it.
You want it, so go back a second, please? Okay, Itzig Spitzig, a little dragon, turns the cat's tail, the black cat's tail. He makes a sword out of a piece of paper and takes the stick for a horse. This is Gimel, Gensel, goose. Gensel, Gensel, go, go, go. Macht sich Eier, lach, aschok. Leicht sich Eier, lach, aschok. Von der Eier, pick, pick, pick. Den Gänser lacht zurück. Just goosey, goosey, go, go, go. Lays many, many eggs. From these eggs, pick, 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 we get little geese again. And Yanko, which is my all-time favorite. Yankel, Bankel, Bull, 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 macht a Reise auf a Stuhl, mit a Hitl auf a Seid, fuhrt sich Yankel weit, weit, weit. Yankel, Bankel, Bull, 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 takes a journey on his chair with his hat on the side. He goes far, far, far. And the last one is Zigala. the tzaddik, a little goat. Tziga miga migala, git uns milcha kriegele, beket meket bekele, in der hartus ekele. Little goat gives us a pitcher full of milk. He baas and he maas, and he keeps his tail high up in the air. So in any case, these were my childhood years, where my father taught me to read and to write Yiddish. And now go back one second. See these?
Yeah.
This is my crayon. When I was small, so I enjoyed drawing on this as well.
Question. It's Yiddish, but the writing is Hebrew, or is it Yiddish writing?
It's Yiddish. It's the same letters. It's the same basic ABC. Just like, for example, English or French, you would have the ABC. There isn't even a Yiddish word here. A Hebrew word here. Sometimes you have Hebrew stemming words in Yiddish. This is purely Yiddish.
Sounds so German, but
Right.
writing is not.
Right. As I said, I sat with my father, so besides the reading, he also taught me Yiddish songs. One of the songs, I don't think you can see the title, but it's Oifen Prepperchik. I'd like to sing it to you. If anybody would like to join me, I'd be very pleased. Oifen Prepperchik, Barenta Fire, ohne Stieb ist heiß. In der Eppelerin kleine Kinder lacht der Maler Face. In der Eppelerin kleine Kinder lacht der Maler Face. Gedenkje kinderlach, gedenkje Teiere, wo sie lernen du. Sagst du noch einmal, im Tag noch einmal, komm mit Zarefu. Sagst du noch einmal, im Tag noch einmal, komm mit Zarefu. Lernen kinderlach, hat mit Meure, jeder unheimlich schwer. Glücklich ist der Jid, was lernen teure, was darf man noch mehr? Glücklich ist der Jid, was lernen teure, was darf man noch mehr? Als ihr Kinder wird älter werden, wird ihr allein verstehen, wie viel in der Oisis liegen Tränen und wie viel Gewinn. Wie viel in der Oisis liegen Tränen und wie viel Gewinn. Lernen kinderlach mit Groß Cheshik, also so ich euch on. Wer's hat besser fin erkennen Ivre, der bekommt davon. Wer's hat besser fin erkennen Ivre, der bekommt davon. Thank you. This is a song, my favorite song, 80 and 70. I'm sorry, I didn't translate the Oifen Pripachik. It's a song about, Pripachik is a fireplace, about the Cheder students, the boys, sitting around the fireplace and the rabbi telling them to continue learning, that it's going to be good for them in the future and they'll understand life better. And this is 80 and 70, which is, he is 80 and she is 70. It's about a couple. And of course you can join in. Sie ist heint akkurat geworden, 50 Jahre, wie sie leben sich in einem, das alte Paar. Sie haben sich geältert, kickt euch sie. 80 in 70 sie. Gott hat sie mit euch in Covid beglückt. Ihr Leben haben sie sich keinmal nicht gekriegt. Nur Natale, nur Babbele, riefen sie sich zieh. 80 in 70 sie, als heut man genommen zu bisslach Wein, dem Segen mit der Bubbin in Rot rein. Die Mime ist gegangen, a Kegen auf a Knie. 80 in 70 sie, als heut man gehuiert bis halbe Nacht. Am Bubbele sucht Seide, a gute Nacht. Schlaf mir gesinnt, in Deck sich zieh. 80 in 70 sie. This is a couple, he's 80, she's 70, and they're celebrating, and it's just very sweet. Oh, okay. This is when we were in New York. This is a picture taken when Ben-Gurion, this was after the establishment of the State of Israel, Ben-Gurion came to visit Israel, came to New York. And this was the parade on Fifth Avenue. My parents instilled in us the love of Israel, Judaism, liberalism, tolerance, and every Friday night we would have a traditional Jewish Friday night dinner. My mother would light the candles, my father would make kiddush, and we'd have golden yoch. We would have golden chicken soup. And Shabbos night, Motzei Shabbos, my mother would sing with us Godfin of Roem. I'm not sure you're familiar with the Godfin of Roem, but where my mother came from in Transylvania, she was taught this by her mother. And